And it really took a certain type of trust and a certain type of employee, I think you admit, who can be self-possessed, self-directed enough to work from home. Not everybody can handle it, right? Or do you find the opposite?
I'm not so sure I agree with that. I
Yeah.
think that the main awakening that's happening now is not because people changed. Did people get materially more sort of responsible over the last 10 years? No, they didn't. We just realized that what makes a good remote worker makes a good worker, period. And that really, let's not even focus on the worker. What makes a good remote working environment is what makes a good working environment, period. That all these attributes that some see as, oh, this is really hard, this is really difficult. That's the hard, difficult work you should be doing anyway. You should be doing it in all companies. You should be writing things down. You should be giving adequate time for considered thought. And these things just don't happen in all these ad hoc meetings. And so all these factors we describe in remote office not required was really just a recapitulation of, hey, here's a good way to run your company such that it doesn't suck.
I agree with that because, sometimes the failure of the team member, the employee in this relationship is the failure of the manager not being clear about what the expectation is, what the outcome is, right? And so you're like, well, we just need to fill these positions, have bodies in a room, but you haven't made it clear to the employee, here is the output. Here is why you're here. You need to push this amount of code. You need to add this amount of features over this period of time. You need to sell this many licenses, whatever the goal is. And for sales, it's easy. You pick a number. For coding, maybe a little harder, right? Like the number of stories or,
I don't even think that sort of goal-based outcomes like that are that helpful. I mean, one of the other things we've published recently is a software methodology called ShapeUp. It's at basecamp.com/ShapeUp, which talks about how we do software development at Basecamp and have really been doing it for the past 20 years. And one of the big ideas there is no estimates. Don't give estimates. Don't require people to commit to estimates. Estimates are because when it comes to creative work, which includes software development, we just don't know. How long is it going to take to make this feature? I don't know. It could take 2 weeks. It could take 2 months. There's a version of this I could probably do in an afternoon. What we focus on is budgets. Hey, you have 4 weeks to come up with a great version of this general, fuzzy, outlined concept. And when you do it like that, you're inspiring trust in the employee that they can figure out how to come up with that great version of the feature. You give the budget that allows someone to work responsible, sustainable hours, that this isn't about crunching for 80 hours because you somehow got roped in to committing to some executive's harebrained version of what that feature should look like. No, you're doing this in collaboration with the designer you're working with on it, the support team you're working with on it, and you're going to come up with something great, and you're going to launch that. And that's going to be a much better way of working rather than hammering people down to sort of these hard estimates that really appear as though they're easy. We could say like, oh, we should launch V1 in like 2 months. That's why you're here. You're hired to do that. Well, does the employee have any control over what goes into V1? If they don't, then it's really...
Yeah, it's very interesting. The point system, when I first heard it, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, so we're going to quantify something, like you're saying, that's artistic in its nature, creative in its nature. And so it's aspirationally very appealing to the business side, right? Like, oh, we have some predictability. Oh, we can take these artists and we can make them into widgets and we can define them like a sales executive. But the truth is, it is creative. And if you give a lot of this is about trust, right? I think remote work is about trust, and giving people, taking out the point system really is about trust with the team. And when you have a team that's qualified and you trust them, you say, listen, here's the canvas, 4 weeks. Here's the goal, a product that's worth paying for. Go. You treat people like adults, and you might get a better result.
I guarantee you're going to get a better result. There's been just sort of a ton of research into this. Drive 2.0 was a Daniel Pink's book, which outlines basically what motivates employees. And you go, they're motivated by mastery, autonomy, purpose. These are the things you can get when you line work up in this way. And I think that the sad thing about the agile development approach, it was full of good ideas, but this point-based system is really a bad idea. Not only, maybe there was a kernel of a good idea inside here that like these points, they could be personal, but oftentimes they're not, right? They're treated as objective, as those programmers are just these machines you can plug in, and you take out one programmer, oh, you lose 15 points. You plug in another programmer, you gain 15 points. That's just not how things work. That's not how humans work. And I think it's just based on a fundamental misunderstanding of that, which makes it just a poor way of working.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think there was a goal in there, and like any incentive system, this is one of the big problems with creating an incentive system in your own company, is that people then start to think the incentive system is the goal of the company as opposed to the product. So you're like, okay, we need to get this many more customers. Like, okay, let's get these customers. And then you find out those customers churn next month or next year. Right. They didn't actually need the product. Right?
They're Wells Fargo, right? You sign up a bunch of, you make a metric that is accounts opened, and the people underneath you who are being whipped into fulfilling those quotas, they will meet them by any means necessary, including opening accounts for dead people, right? And
and fraud. I mean, you woke up one day and you had 6 accounts, and you're like, what happened here? It's like, fraud, an incentive system gone awry. Yeah.
This is the problem with all incentive systems. Incentive systems are simply bunk. There's another great book called Punished by Rewards by Alfie Cohen that outlines all the scientific research on why incentive systems don't work. And the key reason is that they push out the intrinsic motivation that someone might have to do good work. And they replace it with extrinsic motivation, which is simply, I'm going to sort of just optimize this thing I'm being told to optimize for. Right. In programming and in software development, people have tried for a long time. I mean, all the way back in the 80s, we could count lines of code. If we count lines of code, we'll find the most productive programmer, right? I think it was even Bill Gates who said something about if you were giving sort of bonuses for lines of code, it's like declaring the heaviest airplane to be a success. That's just not how these things are measured. The best program is not the biggest program. The most productive programmer is not the programmer who writes the most lines of code.
Yeah. And when you get to scale and a bunch of MBAs come into the business and try to quantify it, and now you've got people thinking in this sort of metacognition about the business, and they try to make it into a system, right? And it's like trying to make, you would never do that with music, right? Or if you did, you'd create a boy band where you'd be like, okay, well, we've just manufactured Boys to Men or whatever we think people want, but it wouldn't stand the test of the times like Bob Dylan does, or, whichever artist actually wrote something soulfully.
And I think this is one of those aspects of our entire approach to work ethics, so to speak, or what qualifies as hard work, that is just utterly mind-blowing. I think on the same tangent, when I first read that Marissa Mayer was bragging about the fact that she was working 120 hours a week, and she could do this by being strategic with her bathroom breaks. I was like, wait, you're an executive at one of the most successful companies in the world, and arguably you have worse working conditions than a slave in ancient
Egypt.
Rome.
Yeah.
Like, how is this? Like, why would you subject yourself to such a degree of sort of poor working conditions? It blows my mind. And I think it's one of those key regressions that if you look over sort of the decades, you look back to like, what were the aspirations of the white collar workers or the managers in like 1980 or 1970? It was to take off early and go to the golf course and enjoy life and have a drink at 4 p.m., right? It wasn't like, hey, how can I stay at work for as many hours as possible? Because that's my only source of satisfaction and meaning in life. Right. I think we've really just taken a seriously bad turn on that road.